this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randall Baier, again.
Great to be
and
here.
We've got a bunch of books to talk about. The one I want to start off with is The Land of Open Graves, Living and Dying on the Migrant Trail, which is really relevant in terms of President Trump's emphasis. But what was interesting to me is he opens off the introduction saying what bothered him were the flies. You know, from all the bodies. This is a pretty interesting book, really.
This is about
You know, from all the bodies. This is a pretty interesting book, really.
This is about North American migration?
Yeah, well, specifically Arizona, Mexico.
I've been in some of those places. Not where there were bodies, but traveling sites. You can, there's you'd say, pathways through the border area. Open rangeland where you could see people, places where they left bottles of, water not filled anymore and camped out for the night and things like that.
What was interesting is that he regards the University of Michigan as his research home. Even though he's not there, that's what he regards as his home. But what he's talking about is the United States-Mexican border and the desperate people looking to breach America's immigration defenses, which is a high-profile issue right now with President Trump. He said, "I quickly learned that death, violence, and suffering are par for the course." And it all started blurring together as he spent more and more time looking at this. And he did 5 years of field work on the Arizona-Mexico border. And I thought that was interesting, despite his abhorrence about flies. But, he was talking about the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and the hundreds that die each year while migrating. So, there's a huge issue. He said the repatriated people are easy to spot because of the uniformity of their appearance. Dark t-shirts with powdery salt rings under the armpits and circling the neck. Sneakers that look like they've been through a meat grinder. Dusty black backpacks stuffed with extra socks, a few cans of food, and whatever meager personal possessions they may have managed to hold on to. Their brown bodies broadcast exhaustion and vulnerability like a scarlet letter. But I thought the human dimension to all this is really interesting. And he talks about this in terms of border stories, and noted that keeping track of the sheer number of publications that focus in some way on the divide between the United States and Mexico is an impossible task. Arizona's right there at Mexico. But the thing that I'm most interested in was the relevance of the research and the carefulness that he did it, because we'll be talking more about books that don't have that quality. And the care that he took in finding out what was going on.
What the full story was behind every incident, or behind the personal sacrifices that people were making.
And in his acknowledgments, he thanked the people that he interviewed. He's at the University of Washington, which provided much-needed resources for the first field season in 2009. But it's that research aspect that I want to concentrate on, because that's what's missing in some of these other books. And he has all these details about Border Patrol apprehensions, distance from the border. And then he's got notes, giving more information about what he ran into. And then he's got his reference list. And I find that really helpful to see the research, you know. And he was very thorough, very careful.
Right. Well, not that you necessarily want to replicate it, but you can get a full picture of where the body of his background is coming from, because in many cases there might be one large body of resource material that an author is drawing from, and that, I guess, sways, or, you know, that has an impact on the argument, I suppose is the best way to put it, because I don't want to make it negative or make it sound negative that it's, you know, imbalanced or whatever, but really who you work with, who you do your research with, who you interview, the sites that you go to, the people that you contact, the resources like archives and whatnot that you use, and you know, your surveys and things like that clearly are what the results will.
Well, there's some really intriguing stuff he's got in his reference list. One of them, by Nicky Rousseau, is the farm, the river, and the picnic spot, topographies of terror. And that was published in African Studies. And then there's Rubio Goldsmith, McCormick, Martinez, and Duarte, and it's in a report on the funnel effect in recovered bodies of unauthorized migrants processed by the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner. Now, that's rough stuff to get, you know?
Yeah. Pima County, that's south of Tucson, maybe?
Well, it was published by the University of Arizona, by National Migration Institute. But it's that level of detail, careful.
That's what you really
research.
need to do.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I've been in that area just as, you know, for 10 or 12 days on a spring break, and it's the area south of Tucson on that border with Mexico. I think it's the San Carlos Mountains, if I'm not mistaken. And I've been down there a few times to Tucson. And one trip with my family, we went to this. My brother-in-law had a sister was working on a ranch. Now, a ranch down there was a cattle range. You know, 10,000 acres, some big, enormous plot of land where a certain body of cattle just were out there for the year, and then they rounded them up. But it was a traffic area of human immigrants coming up from Mexico and going across this area, I guess headed for Tucson. But it was open range, and there were obvious places of, places to sleep, places for camping, and discarded material all over the place. So it was definitely on, a trafficking path of the people coming in. And this is in an area where the Arizona winemaking, in these riparian places where there are, I guess you call them like oases, areas of dampness and whatnot, where you could get water. There's this growing wine industry because the climate is very Mediterranean for wine people. It's at 5,000 feet. It's also high. It's chaparral with lots of low bushy plants, and it's such an odd contrast because it attracts some tourists, and there are some artist colonies down in that area, and yet there's this other side of American life going on, which is the whole contested space of immigration and people wanting to, make a better life for themselves, and then the Border Patrol people are everywhere. The cars are going, if you're just out having a cup of coffee down at the village or on the road, the Border Patrol have a presence everywhere. They're sort of like, you might see state police in other places. Here you see Border Patrol in their green and white vehicles. So it's definitely a sociological kind of milieu where you notice that stuff is going on all around you, and yet you might be at some, espresso place in a town that's well known, that has collected a lot of artists, and people come to, buy weavings and things like that. It's just, and pottery. So a place of contrasts.
Well, there's interesting stuff.
And so this is the darker side, from what I gather.
Elia Shahid wrote looks like an article on a new technique better identifies mummified Mexican border crossers in Arizona.
My Lord. Yeah.
Think about what a research task that is. And then there's other things like, I want to go and I don't want to go, Nicaraguan children's ambivalent experiences of transnational family life. And that was in the Journal of Latin American and Caribbean Anthropology. And there's corpses, dead body politics and agency in human geography, following the corpse of Dr. Petro Groza in the Transactions of the Institute of British Geographers. I mean, the level of detail is really impressive. And I think it gives much more depth to the story than just, a news report. And, it's a really laborious effort to reconstruct this stuff with all the research that he did.
Well, the news works on the sort of the breaking news aspect, the sensational story, the truck left by the side of the road with 30 people or more, dying of thirst inside, and things like that. These highly not inflated, highly impactful news stories that make the breaking news criteria. I mean, you look at the news today; everything's breaking news. It's all breaking. There's like no, it's like, okay, boring news from the border, regular news from the border. Now, breaking news. We've got that. But what you're pointing out is the kind of, let's slog through this data and look at what's really happening here, the deeper research behind that, where every case is telling you something about an overall issue. It's not just the flamboyant kind of big event.
He brings it back to the impact on
big
the people.
Tragedy, yeah.
One of them was this woman, Maricela, who was found dead, and Vanessa said that they were thankful they found her body, even though she was only half there. And she said she came back. If it is her, it helps us to move forward. But I'm telling you, it's very difficult to believe that this is how she is. It's very hard to see her in that form. But that's the value of the research, is it puts context, it puts depth, it puts understanding of what's going on. And so when he's talking about the land of open graves, that's literally true. It isn't some ciphers that just happen to get lost and erased. These are human beings.
Yeah.
Who are trying to find
And I guess the tragedy of the open grave is the fact that maybe the people who are with these folks when they're traveling and when they die, they're really not able to be buried because the other folks have to keep moving. Or probably more insidious things going on as well.
He says, I've learned over the years that as an ethnographer, I have little control over the settings where important fieldwork moments happen.
Mm-hmm.
If I did somehow have a say in these matters, I would choose to be anywhere except the Dunkin' Donuts in Queens, New York. Christian and I are sitting by the window sipping coffee as Saturday traffic passes by outside. I thought this place would be quieter than the restaurant we just ate lunch in. Instead of being drowned out by clanking plates and salsa music, we are now awash in orange and fluorescent pink, the corporate colors of this donut chain, and teenage pop music screaming out of the ceiling speakers. He said, this hardly feels like an appropriate place to reveal the dead. And he shows that Marcella.
Mm.
So I thought this is a really interesting book. And it kind of places into context Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Inquiry into Value. And there were several things that I found that were interesting to me. Because he talks about Kant and Hume and doesn't give any citation where he's talking about.
What
does he mean?
Right.
But why is that?
What does he say?
He says Kant is trying to save scientific empiricism from the consequences of its own self-devouring logic. He starts out at first along the path that Hume has set before him, that all our knowledge begins with experience, there can be no doubt. But he soon departs from the path by denying that all components of knowledge come from the senses at the moment the sense data are received. But through all knowledge begins with experience. But though all knowledge begins with experience, it doesn't follow that it arises out of experience. Now, this is a bunch of mumbo-jumbo generalities. You know, what relevance is that to what he's talking about? What relevance is that to what he's talking about?
Well, you have to go back and at least read the Cliff Notes to Kant to figure out the context. I mean, he's a philosopher giving his own reading of things.
He's not really a philosopher. He's someone who has philosophical dimensions to what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is why I never read the book, is because I first started reading and I said, this is a piece of junk. You know? It's charming. It's charming. You know, and I think it has a relevant thing.
Well, maybe that's, what are you looking for? Are you looking for the book to be an academic treatise?
Well, I want it to be valid. You know, and I think there's a huge...
But it must have proven a certain amount of validity. It's being republished after 50 years. It's sort of one of the iconic books of the past, you know, certainly in American, I guess, Western.
Well, it is, as people
culture.
say, cute.
Could be cute.
It's very cute.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it's dealing with a fundamental issue in our society, or culture, about how we envision ourselves and how we use technology in our culture. And I found over the years that technology has a curse, and that is, it's very complex, but it looks simple to use and to fix, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And it has devastating impacts if you misuse it. And so this whole thing about the art of motorcycle maintenance proves to be exactly that. It's not so simple to answer that question.
Right.
You know, even though he has these different things. For example, he says an example of a priori knowledge is time. You don't see time, neither do you hear it, smell it, taste it, or touch it. It isn't present in the sense data as they are received. Time is what Kant calls an intuition, which the mind must supply as it receives sense data.
Mm-hmm.
The same is true of space. Unless we apply the concept of space and time to the impressions we receive, the world is unintelligible. Just a kaleidoscopic jumble of colors and patterns and noises and smells and pain and taste without meaning. That's so generalized, it's ridiculous, you know? We sense objects in a certain way because they're application of a priori intuitions such as space and time. But we do not create these objects out of imagination as pure philosophical idealists would maintain. The forms of space and time are applied to data as they are received from the object producing. It just goes right off into the deep end without any pause, you know? And this is why I had trouble reading the book the first time. And I didn't realize that until just in the last week when I bought the book because it's in its 50th year. And that until just in the last week when I bought the book because it's in its 50th year. And I saw the charm, you know, and then I realized what was missing. You know, and there's a lot of cute stuff. For example, he's talking about mountains. Without the top to a mountain, you can't have any sides. It's the top that defines the sides. So he's talking about this rock breaks loose from this place, the snow is less visible, even though closer there are things you should notice anyway. To live only for some future goal is shallow. It's the sides of the mountain which sustain life, not the top.
Okay. Well, that's not.
That's cute.
Yeah, but it also you can get simple or complex meaning out of a number of different things. I mean, that's not what's the word? That's not uninsightful, is it? I mean, that the journey has as much importance as the final goal. I mean, I know it can sound really trite, but
it is very trite.
But you know, you've said this about your writing students.
It's not necessarily the product itself, but the process of going through
the journey.
Yeah, well,
but that's also why
the writing exercise of re-editing, making something.
But that's also why
more
I insist
expressive.
that these academic research sources.
Yeah.
You know, because the other stuff is just facile junk.
Yeah. Sounds like you have to fully read the book so that you can actually justify your
because I run across
comments.
these things and go, what?
I'm innocent because I've looked at Persig's book in bookstores. I don't own a copy. I've got it out of the library and read it while I'm either at work or in the library. Snippets, paragraphs, back and forth, nothing cover to cover. I've never read the whole book, and I can't comment. I mean, I would be committing hubris if I commented on, you know, the flip nature of the book or whatever. What do we call this? You call it cute. It's like pop culture. It's sort of pop culture type.
That's what it ends up being.
Yeah.
And he has all
but why is that bad? Why is pop culture bad? Pop
because
culture
in the afterward, he talks about being a culture bearer.
Yeah, but that you're saying
the
pop
Swedish
culture
word
is
culture bearer.
Yeah,
which translates. It's not a concept that has much American use, although it should have.
What's the term?
A cultural bearing book, like a mule, bears the culture on its back.
Mm-hmm.
No one should sit down to write one deliberately. Culture-bearing books occur almost accidentally, like a sudden change in the stock market.
Yeah. So let me ask you, you've probably read The Little Prince.
Yeah.
It's another one that I sort of am guilty of not sitting down and reading, you know, cover to cover with rapt attention.
but as myself as an ADHD reader, I mean, the Little Prince is an icon of wisdom, beauty, poetry. Granted, it's French. You know, we have that love of French philosophical wisdom. Don't laugh, this is a foreign movie, all that type of stuff. But would you say it's undocumented?
Yes.
Would you put it down for being undocumented?
Yes.
Why? I mean, you don't. There must be there's the continuum, isn't there, Jim, between
cute.
Yeah,
Gene
fair enough. But there's the continuum of literature and writing and truth within that, right? You can prove something
Not very deep.
scientifically, and I mean, you might be more on the
It
side
fits
of
some of
wanting
the,
data.
It fits some of the prejudices of people of power who rule cultures. But as far as a document, as far as a reflective process, it doesn't measure up.
Well, your criticism is leaning towards something that is extremely valuable, and that is the whole argument now in our pop culture and our TV culture about fake news, inauthentic data. How do you prove something that's true? And the whole thing is very important to be aware of, because we are inundated with what is it? Alternative facts, false news, fake news. It's now a political sort of a pop culture football, because everybody's claiming fake news. Trump and the folks in Congress and the newspapers and those who say we get the true story, the journalist side trying to get the true story versus the political agency side, they're all claiming everything else is fake news. So what you're saying is you want proof of something. You want to see,
I want the good
show me
stuff.
the data. Right?
But what's interesting here...
So your insight is important to discuss, but I don't know if it's...
What's interesting here is he claims Uncle Tom's Cabin is...
So what you're saying is you want proof of something. You want to see...
I want the good
Show
stuff.
me the data. Right?
But what's interesting here...
So your insight is important to discuss, but I don't know if it's...
What's interesting here is he claims Uncle Tom's Cabin is a cultural bearing book.
And why would it not be?
Because it's so racist, it's unbelievable.
True. And Huck Finn? Huck Finn is also a culture-bearing book.
But it's not racist.
So that's worth a discussion.
Yeah, but I'm talking about Uncle